Does the messenger matter?
Well, obviously the answer is yes. I mean, it's not even a point of discussion. I'm assuming you're going to agree with me. I mean, God help us.
I am going to agree with you that the messenger matters. Yes.
I mean, please. But I think that, that the question is, I think we all, whether we like it or not, everybody understands that the messenger matters. The question is the messenger the only thing that matters? Which I think is where the policy component comes into it, which is the world's best I think the best example is Trump saying we shouldn't tax tips, and then some percentage of the population dismisses that as ridiculous and whatever. And then Harris says we shouldn't tax tips in the service industry, and all of a sudden it's not such a bad idea, which is not to say to offer a real point of view on whether or not we should tax tips, although I can see the advantages socially and structurally. But let me try this a different way. We have reached a point in American society where information is no longer transmittable. The messenger has become so important in every discussion that occurs at a large level or even on a smaller level that good information does not even transmit. And so I actually think the relevance of the messenger is not in dispute, but that the problem for the country and for us as individuals is we are not even able to hear new, different, or interesting ideas because we're so influenced by the messenger. And so I would reframe today's discussion like this and say, do you believe new and valid ideas, that it's even possible for new and valid ideas to enter the national discourse as long as everybody's so concerned about the temperament, vocabulary, style, and identity of the messenger? Like our obsession with public style and identity has made it impossible for us to hear new information, would be my position. Almost impossible.
That's perfect. I think that's very fair too. I think all of us dismiss some of the messages because of who the messenger is, and we don't even hear a word they say, whether that's good or bad. It's not on the surface. You would think, oh, this is horrible. You're not even hearing the message. The other part of it is I kind of feel like listening to somebody and trusting somebody is something that's earned, and that immediately dismissing what somebody says because they don't have the integrity to, or they haven't earned the right, they haven't earned the respect. I think that is very fair, and I don't necessarily think it's wrong to be dismissive of a message if you don't have any trust in the messenger. Does the messenger matter? Yes, but not because of what they say always. It's because of who they are. I think this topic originally came up because we were trying to decide, does the messenger matter, in a pure sense? The more I thought about it is that the messenger matters, but not because of the message. The messenger matters because who the messenger is. And I think that goes for a lot of things. Like you wouldn't use certain companies because you don't believe in their products, no matter how good they are. And you don't listen to certain people because you don't believe that they're truthful or ethical or something else. And for that reason, it doesn't matter what they say. So I definitely think that our society now has come down to, we only listen to the people that we want to listen to. And that is a little bit sad. It's actually, let me take it back. Maybe it's not sad. Maybe it's just scary because it's the wrong direction, because it makes us very one-dimensional.
It makes me think about our discussion, perhaps it was last week, about the issue with social media relative to perpetuation of extremism and sort of cultivating, crackpots, amplifying crackpots,
right,
perpetuating crackpots, right? And what we talked about was there's no penalty for crackpot information, and the only way to potentially regulate it is to force true identity.
Sure.
Right? But that was last week's discussion. So in this case, what you're saying is interesting insofar as it's also, by the way, caveman primitive. No human being has time to listen to every idea that every person has.
Of course not.
And assess
of course
it.
not. Yeah.
And so all human beings, going back to caveman times, look for primitive signals as to whether a person is someone that should or should not be listened to. And the basis upon which someone is listened to or not is, do I trust this person? Do I know this person? Is this person like me? Do I have any, does anyone I know this person? Do they like and trust this person? I mean, we've talked about it with the due diligence issues, even at the largest institutions where, well, because Sequoia was into whatever FTX or whatever it was, everybody else goes in without any due diligence. It's the same basic principle, which is I'm looking for a shortcut to decide whether or not I should listen to you, which goes, again, back to cave times. The issue right now is that the willingness to listen to political candidates is at an all-time low, and correctly so. I think everybody would agree, whatever side of the spectrum you're on, that spending a lot of time listening to the proposals, thinkings, rhetoric, policies, whatever, of an American national political candidate is of little to no value, primarily because people do not trust the politicians, such that even if they do say something that you agree with, your sense is that you're wasting your time listening to their idea, because even if you agree with the idea shall not materialize. And the reason that that has happened is because the penalty for speaking, for abusing the privilege of being a leader, for abusing the privilege of being a messenger, for abusing the privilege of that trust has been non-existent. The penalty should be you get voted out of office. However, with gerrymandering and lack of term limits and all I won't get into the sort of boringness of the American political structure, the intended penalty for abusing the trust of the people is to be voted out of office. And that intended penalty is now non-functional. And so, I mean, listen, this is a conversation going a couple of ways, and I don't want to swirl around in the shitty American political system. The other thing that I'm thinking about is is there a bypass mechanism to surface good policies? So there's one is I would say it brings up two critical questions. One, how do you correct for or improve the penalty for abusing the trust as a politician? And then two, if you can't trust the messengers, which everybody would agree you can't trust the messengers in general, how do you surface good policies if the messengers themselves are no longer an effective conduit to surface policy?
So the answer to the second question is that is why you essentially that's why it's so hard to change your political affiliation, because you're essentially betting on a platform, and what you're hoping for is that because of the large numbers of participants in that platform. That's what's so dangerous about a dictatorship or about a one-man show, is that, and that's what works in America, is that as long as there's enough people to protect the platform of that party, then you're voting for the party's platform, not for that one individual. When there's an individual that is bigger than the party, and this is the challenge that the Republican Party has to deal with right now, when you have a person that's leading the party that's bigger than the party, then you can't trust the law of large numbers. Then you can't trust the party's platform, because then it gets into, that's when people say, well, stop talking about, are you worried about democracy? Stop talking about dictatorship crap, all that stuff. But the reality is that when you have a candidate that is smaller than the party itself, then you know that the party's platform is what you're actually voting for. When you have a candidate that's bigger than the party itself, then that's where the risk is, because that's when the candidate overpowers the party, and then you're no longer getting the party platform. And that's what's happened to a certain extent on one side of the aisle this year. The challenge is that, and this is the challenge for 2024, is that I think that what saves everything in this country and why democracy works is that the party platform ultimately wins, and the candidate themselves is fairly irrelevant. And that's what saves democracy, and that's what saves our system. And so that's why something like a debate is so important, because you actually don't care about the ridiculousness of the comments, whatever they might be on either side. Like that everybody knows prior to a debate what the topics are going to be. And the reason I'm bringing up a debate is because the only time you get to see somebody one-on-one, and you already know what the topics are going to be. You're going to cover inflation. You're going to cover healthcare, you're going to cover, unemployment, you're going to cover immigration, you're going to cover whatever they are. But how the candidate, not how they answer the questions directly, because nobody ever does. It's how they handle themselves, and it's the perception of how that person handles themselves. Do you believe that person? The integrity of that person? The ethics of that person. And that's why those things are so important, because that's where you get to differentiate one person from another person. The challenge at that point then for the voters is say, okay, this is the platform I like, and this candidate seems to be reasonable enough to execute that platform. You're not really, that the candidates are, what they're talking about is all just, whatever they need to do to sell.
Words.
Yeah, we don't take that. I don't take that.
So here are two substantial concerns that I have. The rate of change on Earth is the highest it has ever been.
The rate of change on what?
On Earth.
Oh, the rate of change. Okay.
Yeah,
sure.
The rate of change is the highest it has ever been. No one will disagree with that. Transportation, communication, technology.
Yeah, sure. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing, Dylan. That's a good thing.
I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm not saying
okay.
I'm saying it's a fact.
Okay.
When the rate of change is very high and the complexity is also very high, the typical way to manage a system with a high rate of change and a high level of complexity is through a management filter that I think is most easily described as first principles, right? Because there's too many decisions, there's too many things. You're not going to get into the weeds of all the complexity and all the rate of change, but you have first principles. And the first principle is do no harm, or the first principle is reward the shareholder, or the first principle is take, Jeff Bezos, right? Like obsessed with the customer. And I'm not picking any particular, I don't mean to draw Bezos uniquely into it, but I'm just trying to say first principles is the only way that you can navigate a value system against complexity and a high rate of change.
Okay.
A big company like Tasty, doesn't matter, right? Like you need to have some basic core set of values and filters because there's too many decisions every day, different offices, different bureaus, different people, different things. You can't make all the decisions. Instead of having a set of first principles to navigate anything, American politics, I believe, is uniquely dominated by versions of emotional manipulation. This guy's the devil, this lady's the devil, this is going to do this. Which is standard political aspects. But when the rate of change is really high, the penalty for bad decision making is also really high. And the opportunity, the reward for good decision making is really high. And so I believe it's on us, forget the politicians, it's on us as Americans and us as voters and us as citizens to try to identify a way to improve the system to better, more rapidly reveal good policies and implement them.
All right.
And that holding on to bad policies is more dangerous now than it was 50 years ago.
It is, but
because of the rate of change.
Sure, I agree with you, but is holding on to bad policies worse than holding on to bad people?
Is holding on to
because that's where the messenger comes into play. That's the challenge. The policies.
But so elaborate on that. Elaborate on that.
Because, again, it gets back to the policies are almost always going to be platform policies. There's rarely strays from platform policies because you have this huge protective net which is everybody else in the party that you need in order to get things done. There's very little, quote, executive privilege, things like that. You can't bully over, you can't run over, other branches. That's why we have all these checks and balances and everything else. So you're always just tweaking the view, the vision, the will of the party's platform. That's the good part. But sometimes if you have the wrong messenger, not only does the message potentially get messed up, but the messenger can't articulate the message, nor can the messenger even effectively execute the message. So the messenger matters. That's all I'm saying.
I see what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. No, I would say the messenger is the most important thing. I would say it's sort of like if I have good ideas, but I'm locked in a room and no one can hear me. It's like, if a tree falls in the woods, does it matter?
That's right.
If you have the best idea, if no one's listening to the messenger,
Yeah.
And if the message, like if the Bloomberg instant messenger system stops working, or if the WhatsApp or the SMS, text message system stops working, does it matter that I'm sending you the most brilliant text message in history if no one can receive it? And that's the problem with American politics right now, is that the messengers, I think, are that there's very little time is allocated to actually hearing the message of these politicians. I think, for, not to bring Jamie Dimon into it for no reason, but he made a comment, I guess it was last week or whenever it was in the past 10 days, that I thought was insightful, that, certainly from where I work and live, and I think from where you work and live, is not something you're always aware of, but the Federal Reserve cut interest rates earlier this month. And out of a 300 million or 320 million Americans, whatever it is, maybe 15 million Americans even know that happened.
Well, what's the insight there?
That the messages that are not heard are not heard. And that if you have a good policy, not that Fed rate cuts are important or a good or bad policy, but that a good idea is only as good as its ability to propel itself through the communication of the democracy.
That's assuming that you think that a Fed rate cut is good for,
I'm using it as evidence of the impotence of the communication. I don't care about the Fed rate cut. I'm saying that's a monumental decision in some worlds, and it doesn't transmit very far.
Yeah, I actually disagree on that, but I understand what you're saying.
Maybe it's a bad example.
Yeah.
But my point is that messages don't transmit.
That's fine.
Inside of this system. And I think that that's a major problem.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem in the world, and certainly in America, is the inefficiency and lousy functioning of the messaging system, metaphorically.
Well, one of the reasons for that is that we used to have the messaging system used to be really important. So the messages that mattered would come from people that I feel like over the last century or so, the messages that really mattered, that changed who we are today, those messages may have started originally with, politicians or activists or things like that. And whether they be civil rights activists or, anti-war activists or somebody else, they could have been conservative activists, liberal activists, doesn't matter who it is, could have been a politician. But that's totally changed now. And in 2024, those people have lost much of the relevance. And the messages today come from social media participants, big name social media participants, very popular athletes, actors and actresses, entertainers. It's a completely different world. The messages are no longer, the messages might be from a businessman, which you never would have seen, back whenever. So you'll get messages from, the Elon Musks of the world, not necessarily just him, but, like you mentioned, Jamie Dimon or something like that. This is a real significant change. And so that's why the messenger now in politics matters so much more, because we don't really care about what they say. We care about the integrity with which they say it. And I think that's the best. And I think that's the thing that's lost in all of this is, that is the most challenging thing. That's why so many people have such a hard time going, why don't you like this person? Because I don't believe that person. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
This.
No, I think that's the entire thing. And then the issue is, I think the reason that Josh brought this up as a topic was because then you have, because of the fact the integrity of the messenger supersedes the message. The consequence of that is a low integrity messenger will offer up a good idea, whatever that exactly means, but an appealing and sound idea, but that appealing and sound idea will be dismissed because it comes from the mouth of a low integrity messenger. Yeah. And in the process, we are deprived of a better policy as a general rule.
Yeah. If the person saying something, has integrity, then that message is important. If the person saying something doesn't have any integrity, that message is irrelevant no matter what they say, because everything else gets thrown out the window. That's the biggest issue we have. And that is the challenge with the messenger. That's the challenge with the messages. That's the challenge with everything. And unfortunately, it's a real problem because a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people think you can look past, a lot of people think you can use the excuse of, that's just who they are. And you can't. That's just what they used to say with some athlete. That's just so-and-so being, that's just so-and-so being so-and-so. That's just a tiger being a tiger. That was the old, when the old Chris Rock joke when Siegfried and Roy's tiger ate Siegfried or ate Roy. How could the tiger do that? It was just a tiger being a tiger. That's it. That's what this is. And so anyway, I just think that's
so I guess the question is, because here's the fantasy solution is that policies emerge without a messenger, but through some sort of AI digital policy institute, and that that there's a way to evaluate policies away from them, that the messenger is secondary to the policy, as opposed to how it is right now. The messenger has primacy over all policies. And the issue is that human beings are wired in such a way. One of the first sort of executive producers or real seasoned TV producers that I worked with at NBC when I was first starting there, it was very clear and explained to me, and I think he was right. People on television, or people when they watch television, I should say, are watching other people. And so it matters who the people on television are. People watch people. People don't watch ideas. People don't watch concepts or artistic interpretations or impressions. People watch other people. It's hardwired in human beings.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That was the whole kind of genesis behind Tasty. We were like, financial news is just, financial news goes...
Wrong people. You were like, it's the wrong people talking about the wrong things.
I'm like...
We're a different group of people.
It's like you're reading something and you can't get through the paragraph because you just keep like you just read it, but it doesn't really, nothing registers. Financial news to me was the same way. You listen to it, you're like it's like you're just staring into space. It goes in one ear and out the other. You don't hear a thing that they say because it's just blah blah blah. And the whole thing with Tasty was let's create an environment where the people matter and it's all about the people.
And people watch people. But the point is, because of that, if the messenger is untrustworthy, because people are so important, the policy discussion is completely compromised.
So there's a second topic that we put in today that I think is really good. That complements this, because we're coming up on the election and there is a lot of chatter. But still, only a fraction of the people in this country vote. A lot of chatter. Everybody's got an opinion.
Typically half.
Okay. So
half of the eligible.
If you are eligible to vote, should there be a requirement? Should it be mandatory that you vote?
No question, yes.
Because there are places, I think like Australia. Yeah. There are other places too, all around the world, where it's mandatory that you vote.
I believe it should be 100% mandatory that you vote. And I believe it should be 100% mandatory that you contribute money to a political campaign, up to the point where I actually think that there should be a mandatory $200 that every person must donate to political campaigns, and that money should be tax deductible. So not only do I think there should be mandatory voting, I believe there should be mandatory contribution, and that should get a tax exemption.
And why should there be mandatory contribution?
Because it forces engagement, where it's like, again, it's not just in my voting, but I'm like, I'm going to give $5 to Sosnoff. I'm going to give $5 to Radigan. I'm going to give $5 to Vanetta, whoever the candidates may be. That $5 is think about the difference between a paper trading account at Tasty Trade and a small, $100 or $500, $1,000 cash account. Real money, real financial interest completely changes the level of engagement and psychology. I think that voting should be mandatory, and political contribution should be mandatory. Tax deductible.
I haven't thought about political contributions that much, but voting, I've thought about it. I've thought about ways to do it. And I agree that I think if voting were mandatory, it would be much more, the discourse would be much more civilized, and the discussions would be way more relevant. The candidates would be very different. Very, very different.
And I think you would get electoral reform. The gerrymandering would be dealt with. Ranked choice voting would be, all these sort of efficiencies going to sort of rate of change and the ability to update the structure would happen. Because right now, as a frequent non-voter myself, the primary mechanism for dealing with the perception of a functionally corrupt American political system is simply not to participate, which only empowers the corrupt. It makes it easier to be controlled by the worst actors in the system.
That's true.
You want a little history lesson just for the fun of it?
Sure.
Very, very Midwestern. So voter participation in the United States at one time was actually much higher, 80-90% of eligible voters. And then I believe it was the election of 1896. There was a very strong third party candidate. I remember the name of the party, but someone watching will know, led by a man named William Jennings Bryan. And so you had the Republican candidate in 1896, you had the Democratic Party candidate in 1896, and then you had the equivalent of a Ross Perot, like a very strong 20-25% of the votes kind of thing from William Jennings Bryan, who was represented the Midwest against the East and the West Coast. The idea was that these were the farmers, these were the agriculture, these were the actual producers of the commodities of America, as opposed to the bankers and the railroad barons and the oil guys and the Hollywood people and all this stuff. And at the Democratic Party convention in 1896, the Democratic Party made a deal with William Jennings Bryan, Bryant, saying that they would internalize William Jennings Bryant's request for a bunch of different policy things into the Democratic Party platform if William Jennings Bryant basically threw down with the Democrats, stepped aside, and endorsed the Democratic candidate, which he did. Then the Democrats won. And then the Democrats adopted a total of 0 of the things that that his party had been demanding. And if you look at the history of voter participation in the United States, it went from 80 or 90% in the 1800s of those who were eligible to vote, by the way, because women couldn't vote and the whole bunch of other major problems there. And switched down to 50 to 60% voter participation. My point is, you talk about lack of trust as the core issue with the messenger, and that election of 1896 was the most fundamentally damaging event in the history of American politics to trust in politicians. And that's when American voters stopped voting, which is all the more reason to make it illegal not to vote, to force everybody, including myself, back into the room.
I did not know that was it. That was a little history lesson. I like it.
I'm warming up for our election special in November. You know, I'm working on some material because it could be a long night.
I think what it would do more than anything else is just it'll change building up our consumer know-how on just, who the politicians are. I just think it changes everything. I'm not sure that you can do that in America, but I mean, it would be cool if you could. I'll just leave it there.
I mean, it's almost like, it really goes with your opinion that everybody should have at least a small active trading account, even if it's not their primary use of their investment assets, that you're a different human being if you're forced into having an opinion and understanding the mechanics of the bond, stock indexes. I won't list a bunch of securities.
Yeah.
And that being forced to vote would have a similar effect.
Yeah, it would. It would. And it's easy to do too. So yeah, I mean, we're both in favor. Good. That's a good to know. That's a good thing. We're rarely on the same page.
How do you solve the messenger issue in the final minutes of this? Just like this, because I liked your solution last week of forced true identity to reduce the sort of crackpot phenomenon.
I don't
this
know.
This one's trickier.
I mean, I'm hoping that after this election, so the whole problem with integrity is that you have to kill them when they're young in order to protect the system. What that means is if you have 70, 75, 80-year-old candidates, there's nothing you can do. At that point, they are who they are. And at that point, if they're still in the race and they're running and they're 80 years old, there's nothing left to do. The reason they're there is because, enough people think that they're the right person and nobody else wants to challenge them. So they're like the, Lion King, but they haven't been beaten up and thrown out yet or whatever, haven't been killed. The way you get around it is you create in the system younger candidates that have to prove themselves, that don't have that history, and therefore they don't get the benefit of the doubt. And if they have no integrity or they're crackpots or they're pathological liars or they're whatever they are, they don't have a chance. And therefore they get tossed out. It's a matter of.
So how would you do that? How do you do that? Because in a
well, I don't think I think it happens automatically. I think it will happen after this election. I think after this election, you've seen the last, on the Democratic side, you've seen the last of the Joe Bidens of the world. You know, they're gone. It's not, you're not going to have 82-year-old candidates, 78-year-old candidates. On the Republican side, I think this is the last time you'll see it. I don't think you'll have any more. I don't know how old Trump is, 77, 78, 79, whatever he is. I don't think you'll have any more 79-year-old Republicans. I think they're done. And I think you're going to end up with, you know, somebody who's young, smart, articulate, and who still has some credibility and some integrity. And I think that that's what your next Republican candidate is going to look like. They have to go back to, go back to basics, go back to a different policy. And I think that'll happen. And I think you're going to see both sides come at it like that in the future. The future elections are going to be very different than they are today. Very different. This is the last time you're going to see a race of dinosaurs. The last time.
I agree with that. I mean, I'm hopeful. I mean, I just don't know. The reason I'm quiet is because I'm questioning whether.
Yeah, it's the last time.
But is the issue the age of the dinosaurs, or is the issue the
it's not the age? It's not the age of the dinosaurs.
Because I could put young people in there that are also
no, you can't, because the young people don't get, like young people. The perfect example is Trump and J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance gets zero respect. The chances of him running for president right now would be less than zero. He would lose.
I could say the same thing about Harris, but for the manipulation to make her the candidate. She never ran either.
It's not a question of running. It has nothing to do with running. It has nothing to do with running. It has to do with whether or not, I'm not talking about Democrats at all voting for J.D. Vance or Trump. I'm saying if you're a Republican right now, there's no way that even though J.D. Vance and Trump have essentially stand on the same platform, on the same way, on the same issues, nobody in the Republican Party is voting for J.D. Vance if he was the candidate. That's the difference. And for Trump, he has a certain amount of credibility among his base and among the Republican Party that he doesn't have to answer those same questions. He's earned that. Mm-hmm. Vance has not. And that's the whole difference. And so that's why next time around, you're not going to see that anymore. That's over. And the new generation of politicians will come in and they will have to prove themselves. And I think that's a very different, I don't think you're going to see us go back to this. I don't think you see either party run the risk of a 70, 75, 80-year-old politician who is, at that point in their life and career and everything else. I just don't think that's going to happen. Even though you carry some credibility with you because you got there, the integrity piece it's not going to happen.
I hope you're right. I was just imagining Tim Walz is going to run for president in 8 years after 2 Harris terms.
I do not think that is going to be the case. Anyway, I'm going to let you go.
All right.
I'm Tom Sosnoff. He's Dylan Radigan. This is Truth or Skepticism. Thanks so much for spending the last 40 minutes with us. And we will see you next Wednesday. Same bad time, same bad place. Thanks. Thanks, Dylan.
Bye.